Welcome to the Truth, Lies, and Consequences podcast. I'm your host, Ebony Turner.
And I'm your host, Charity Hill.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about the 4 principles of self-discovery. The 4 principles of self-discovery are spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. Where these 4 principles came from for me and why they hit close to home. Mm-hmm. I was in a relationship that just wasn't good for me. And in the midst of that relationship, there was a period of time where it was just on shaky ground, right? There was some trust issues going on, and the person, he said, hey, listen, you got to trust me. And from good relationship advice tells you that if you're going to trust the person, you need to trust them. So taking that advice of you got to trust the person that you with if you decide to stay. But at the same time, it's just that, I guess it's that shakiness. Like, what if I'm putting my trust in the wrong person? Mm-hmm. So God helped me to see that I couldn't control the other person. The only person I can control is myself.
Yes.
And then even within myself, there's different aspects of it, right? Like, we're complex beings. So we have the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical aspects of ourselves. And if you have all of those pieces checked off, and I don't say checked off, but if you're strong and continuously growing in each of those areas, you have a level of balance in your life and a level of, I guess, health and well-being in your life. Now, this is not the end-all be-all. This does not mean that you're going to be happy-go-lucky every single day of your life.
Right.
But I think these are the 4 key principles that when you're in tune with those areas, it just sets you up in a really nice way of understanding who you are, and when things are off and in which areas those things are off with you, and that which you might need to spend a little bit more time and energy investing in to build that up within yourself. So that is kind of, for me, where these 4 principles and how they resonate with me and where they came from, as far as that relationship didn't really end well, right? But because I knew about these 4 principles, those were the things that I spent my time and energy in the recovery period of the getting over the relationship. That really was an anchor for me to help me stay grounded and help me not go down a path that I would regret, right? Making those regrettable decisions after a bad breakup. Those 4 principles really helped me with that. So that's my story of how that kind of relates to me. What comes to mind for you as you think about those 4 principles and how it resonates with you?
These 4 principles, I think, are key and definitely necessary for any adult to have a well-adjusted and balanced life. I'm really glad you've pinpointed these 4 areas that are really the best way of being healthy for oneself. And by using these principles to develop yourself, it makes you better in relationships as well. So I'm really
absolutely, yeah,
glad that you pinpointed those. I totally agree with them. Those 4, if you got that spiritual line, you got the mental, the emotional, the physical, they all work so closely together that if one is a little out, the others tend to also be imbalanced, and it's a way to kind of check oneself and keep an alignment with who you are and what you want to stand for.
Yeah.
That if people would pay attention to those principles in their lives and invest to be healthy in those areas, whether it's good times, bad times, how you deal with it within yourself and how you feel. It can make a world of difference of how you go through those experiences in life. For myself, that's where I've always tried to work towards. Some areas I'm better at than others, but I definitely feel that when I keep them in check, then a lot of other things can be in check as well.
And that was real good, because when you said that sometimes you got to work on, so it's that continuous process.
Oh, definitely.
Sometimes one area may be stronger than another area, and you may have to shift your focus on another area over one. And then there's certain things that you might come across in life that may challenge one area over another area. So that's real good. That, like you said, like it's not an idea that in all four of them you're always going to be at 100% in all four,
right?
But it's being in tune enough to know, okay, where am I in each of these categories, and what am I doing to restore and build up each of these categories, getting stronger every day. Mm-hmm. And it's what that saying, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready type thing. Right. So when you're ready and all of that, and life hits you because it is. You in a storm, you getting out of a storm, you headed toward another storm. Like that's that general principle that we've heard before. Mm-hmm. So these things I think really help you to stay grounded and not lose yourself when life hits you like that, and you go through trials and tribulations in our lives and stuff like that. So
they're more like, instead of looking at the 4 principles as being a checklist, I would see them more as building blocks, as the components that help you build the life that you want to live, and how those pieces fit together to build you up to be the person you want to become. And by making sure that you have enough of each, it makes sure that the building is stable. Sometimes when we're overly emotional, that can make the foundation be unstable. Sometimes if we think about things too much, that can make the foundation a little unstable, because you still need that spiritual and physical. All of the pieces have to work and intertwine together for you to get the best result from yourself in dealing with those circumstances.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
A good approach to kind of look at how, and then like you're saying, depending on the circumstance, you may need to lean in on some more than others. So those are the times you may need to put a few more blocks on the emotional side, because you're going through an emotional point in your life, when maybe the loss of a parent or the loss of a relationship. It's, those emotions are there to help us move through those things. Sometimes it's a matter of dealing with the spiritual component, where there's nothing else that can help you but to lean in on that faith. So you may have to put a few more blocks to help secure you in that season of your life. So it's not that one is more important than the other. I believe they all have priority of how they come together. I feel that spiritual is the number one.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, right. Like when you talked about that building, it feels like to me the spiritual is like the you got to lay the foundation of it. Right. That.
And then with the spiritual, that also has a great impact to your mental, how you think about things. Well, if you're spiritually aligned, for example, I'm a Christian, so my spiritual alignment is based on what's said in the Bible and what Jesus and what God says about things in life. So those are the things, those are the promises, those are the qualities and standards that I hold my life up to. So when other aspects come around, if it doesn't line up with what the Bible says, I go with that, because that's what rings true for me. So that's how the spiritual is number one for my life. Then by having that spiritual, it dictates to my mental what it is that God says about me. So that's how I align my mindset to be what God says my mind should be thinking on. Then from the mental component, I tie that with the emotional, because 9 times out of 10, what you feel about something is what you think about something.
What you're thinking, exactly. Yep. So what you think about, it has a lot to do with how you feel about things. Your thoughts of. I've noticed that within myself. Like all of a sudden I start feeling anxious about something, and I'm like, how all of a sudden am I anxious? And then I realize, and I rewind my thoughts for a second. It's like, oh yeah, I was thinking about this particular thing over here, and then boom, now I'm able to connect how that thought I had in my mind created that emotion. But then to the point you brought up, that spiritual grounding of the Bible talked about think on these things, right? So it's like, okay, does that fit into those categories of the things you should be thinking about, and then adjusting accordingly? So I like that the way you're laying the connection of them down. Definitely, yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then with having that the mental embracing the emotional, depending on how that emotion is setting you in a good direction or a bad direction, that's where your physical follows. So if you're emotionally feeling positive about a circumstance, your body language will have a more positive direction.
Yep.
Where if your mental space determines your emotions to go into a negative thought process, your body will reflect that just as much. All of these areas are ways we communicate, and physical communication is very important. For example, when people are dealing with, like you said, anxiety or depression, or that physically takes a toll on people.
Absolutely.
And you don't necessarily rewind back of, well, physically I'm feeling this way. Well, why is my emotional space there? Okay, emotionally, that's a little unbalanced. So, okay, so where's my mental state to get to me to that emotional unbalance? All right, so now mentally I'm a little off with why I'm feeling that way. So go back to, well, what spiritually do I need to be in tune with to get all the other pieces to link back up properly? I think God created all of these avenues within our body so that we would know that being spiritually aligned with Him is very crucial, because if that part is not in position properly, the other pieces will fall apart quite easily.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a couple things that come to mind as you were breaking that down too. So I think definitely it could work when you think about the mental, emotional, and that feeds into your physical. But I've even found sometimes too, let's say there's like thoughts in my head or an emotion I'm feeling that I don't want to feel. Sometimes you can start with the physical, like just start moving. Now, I'm not talking, like, I know there's a such thing as, like, clinically depressed and in a level where you need medication and things like that to help you get out of a state. Right. But sometimes for those that are not dealing with like clinical depression, but they're just kind of in like this,
a funky mood.
A funky mood. Exactly. And sometimes it just takes you getting up and getting moving. And then that just also helps with the emotional and the mental as well, because you're starting to move. And also with the physical too, like, for me, I like to take really long walks. And when I do that, that also helps me to line everything else, because of course you're out with nature and then you're with yourself. So you get to hear your inner voice, which I think speaks to the spiritual. You're helping to de-stress and declutter your mind for the mental, and then you're recentering yourself emotionally. So even I think the physical also, like to your point, I think a great point that the emotional and mental can feed to the physical. And I think that's great to say, hey, sometimes you're physically drained and you physically don't want to get up and get moving, but sometimes you could flip it the other way. And when you physically get up and get moving, that actually also could help the mental and emotional state as well. And then that spiritual piece of it, and that's the other thing that came to mind is around the spiritual aspect. And you said that being so important, because at the end of the day, I believe we're spiritual beings.
Oh yes,
and I believe
definitely.
as such, like listening to, it's crazy how we're taught to, like, I guess, listen to all of the external pieces instead of just taking a second and just listening to your own inner voice. And I think that's our connection to God, as we listen to that inner voice and not always take in what everybody else thinks about stuff and allow everybody else's issues, situations, and things like that. We care about others, but just having that time to connect with yourself. And I'm gonna ask you this question. Like, I think people are afraid of that. Like, they're afraid of being alone. Like, even in this environment we're in now with the coronavirus and people having to be home and being isolated. I know some of that is because some people are extroverted people that need to connect with other people, and some people are introverted, so they might be okay with that. But do you think some of that too is just people don't like having to just sit with themselves and listen to their own inner voice and prefer the distractions of being able to do other things? And that could cause some of that imbalance and maybe even unhappiness as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. I really do. Because especially in our American lifestyle, we tend to always fill the space. Just fill the space.
Exactly. Right.
By filling the space, we're not dealing with the real issue. And as long as I can distract myself, as long as I don't have to actually focus on what the real problems are, the problems don't exist. But that's not true. The problems are still there. And by having to take away all the things that are filling the space, now we're pulling back the curtains and seeing what the real issues are. And some people aren't prepared to deal with those issues. And being able to strengthen yourself in those 4 principles are pertinent for times that you're not even ready to deal with things. For myself personally, I always thought I was more of an extroverted personality, which I do tend to get my energy from being around other people and socializing and things of that nature. But being that in lockdown, I'm not around as many people, I'm still finding ways to get energy. And the way I've done that most is by tapping into more of my spirituality, where I'm praying more, I'm reading my Bible more, I'm listening to more gospel music. I'm feeding my soul, I'm feeding my spirit more. And that's what's giving me the energy that I normally would kind of get from other individuals. So by having that constant conversation with God instead of that constant conversation with others, it's still giving me a sense of energy that really should be the way I should get my energy anyway. But it's easy when you're in the constant rat race of just going, you know, you get up, you're in traffic, you get to the office, you talk to everybody, you do your little bit of work, you go to lunch, you talk a little there. You know, I don't have all those avenues anymore. So and hey, this is it. What, you know, how am I going to be able to thrive now? So that is really what's worked for me in this season. As for my mental space, you know, due to the fact that I'm praying more and thinking more about things, it's made me not think about frivolous stuff as much.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I focus
priorities change, right?
Yes, priorities change majorly. And not saying those things that I thought about before were bad things. But I just don't put as much mental energy towards those things now. If you know, it's like, where am I going? I'm not going anywhere, so I'm not buying any new clothes. I'm not buying a whole bunch of stuff. So that's one thing where my mental space has changed. As for my emotional space, that has been definitely an area of opportunity for me, along with a lot of the civil unrest that we've also been having in our country.
Absolutely. Yep.
It made my emotional state be a little bit more, I feel emotionally sensitive. My emotional state is in a more sensitive place than it normally would be with these types of occurrences, whether it's the different racial things that are going on in our country, the different political things that are going on in our country, which being sensitive to those things, it does play into my emotional state. I try not to let those things get me down. I try to use those things to push me more towards leaning into my spiritual space instead of using it as a way to get angry about things or to get. Now, I'm not saying I don't have those emotions. The Bible says get angry, but sin not. You know, God gave us these emotions for us to be, as I say, as flags in our spirit to know what our heart is in line with. So I don't shy away from emotions. I know what those emotions are motivating me to feel, why certain things are making me feel certain emotions, and what's that about. I use them more as indicators of my spirit than motivators to what I should do. Right.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. And then physically, I've probably not been at the best during this quarantine. Get out like I probably should, and it's
scary though, because you go out, you might get something, you might pick up. So it's understandable that there might be apprehension around that, right? I don't know.
Not as much as apprehension. It's more so after dealing with, I guess, the spiritual, mental, emotional, by the time I get the physical, I'm like, I'm gonna just sit on this couch.
Oh goodness!
I always tell myself, like, hey, if I had time, I would work out, and I would go, I would take walks. Yeah, that's a lie. I don't do that, but I can't say I can blame. I used to say, well, it's always because I'm always busy working that I don't ever have time working. No, Charity just does not like to exercise. Charity does not. I know that about her. There's no denying it, and that's just our area of opportunity that I need to just do a better job taking care of me physically as I get older. I just need to do better, eating better. I just need to do better because working out is it's just not my thing. I still want to do it and I still need to do it. But knowing that that's not something that if I had more time, it would make a difference. That means I need to do other things physically better.
Right. No, that makes sense.
So that's what the season of lockdown has kind of reflected to me, and how those 4 principles have really shown up and been mirrored to me.
Yep. Right.
This season, in good ways, I feel. In ways I think I would have never been able to do if this hadn't occurred. So I'm grateful for that component of it all.
Yeah.
As the quarantine, this whole season, how have those principles been reflected in your life, Ebony?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, and I'd say before I jump into mine, I think, you know, the level of transparency that you have was pretty cool. Of like, hey, these are the things, and as we talked about before, right? There's certain areas that we feel like, I'm rocking it out, or doing really well on the spiritual and even the mental side of it. But when it comes to that emotional and physical side of it, I know that because of the external things that I maybe can't control with the unrest and everything else, but at least you're aware that that's an area that you're sensitive to or vulnerable to right now. And then you're aware of the physical, I'd like to probably do a little bit more of this and do a little bit more of that. But if you're walking around not even knowing that that's something that you may want to work on, or something that's going on with you, and then you're like maybe irritable, or you're doing, like, from the emotional aspect of it, right? Maybe you're irritable, or you're doing this, that, or other thing, and you're not in tune with the fact that, that's because on an emotional level, I'm, sensitive right now to what's happening around me that I can't control. So just being in tune with that, I think just the awareness in and of itself, even if you don't necessarily do anything about it, at least you're starting out from a place of awareness. And then I believe the way our minds work is that eventually your brain will start to help you find solutions for it as you've let it know that, okay, this is something that I think is kind of not a problem, but something that I'm struggling with or going through. So that's pretty cool of the transparency that you gave with that. And so for me, following suit with the transparency. So on the spiritual level, I'd say I haven't been reading and praying as much. I'd say definitely the inner voice, and maybe constant prayer, constantly, like, there's certain things that God will bring to my attention that, okay, you have what is the word? You have a certain thing in your heart against a particular person, or right. And so you, the way you handle this, or so there's certain things that I feel like there's this constant connectiveness of being connected with God, and I guess a constant level of prayer. But one of the things that I want to continue, and then also being involved in church and being around other believers, and that also is encouraging as well. And then the thing that I would like to do more of, and I thought that, like you said, with the physical, if I had more time, I'd read the Bible more, and things like that I don't find myself doing. But I know that we talked about the spiritual piece is the foundation. So when I'm in the middle of a really hard crisis or struggle, when things get really bad, the first thing I do is go to the Bible and soak into that. But it's almost like what is the best way to say this? It's like you eat a meal, like maybe reading the Bible is eating a meal. And then I'm like, all right, well, I'm full for now. And then you kind of remember the meal you ate. So it's almost like instead of constantly reading it on a regular basis to continue to nourish myself, I kind of basically think that the last meal I had 3-4 days ago, that's enough to tie me over. So definitely getting to a place where I do better at that. So that would be an area for me where it's like, that's probably, I need to shore that up and better that. And for the mental piece, and we talked about, I do have anxiety issue, or I struggle with anxiety, and I the way I combat that is, like you talked about, the news and the unrest and civil unrest and everything else. So I cut the news off. So I don't listen to the news. So
that's smart.
So oftentimes it's good and bad, because at one time there was like a tropical storm or something on the coast, and I did not know. And my mom was like, "Do you ever watch the news?" So it's sometimes you might not know what's going on, but for the most part, it helps me to manage my anxiety. Yeah, right. And so for me, I've been able to help do that by watching the input, watching what goes into my mind.
That's
helps me on the mental level, right?
Yep.
And then that kind of also feeds into the emotional piece for me, because I have an empathic nature, and that means that I can, I guess I pick up the emotions of other people, and I'm able to feel for other people. Like I physically can feel if somebody's going through something. So if I watch certain news or I hear certain bad news or whatever it is, that creates anxiety for me as well. So what I've been doing a really good job of, and that's partly because I live alone, so if you turn off the news, you don't have anybody else necessarily bringing bad news to you or having to worry about picking up other people's emotions. But
that's true.
I still work with people, and I'm interacting with people working from home on a day-to-day. So you're still interacting with people. You go to the grocery store, you go for a walk or whatever. You still have that level of, even connecting with family virtually. So you still have to develop boundaries there. So I've been doing a really good job of creating boundaries around my emotions, so that I know, okay, these are my emotions. This is what I'm feeling, and this is what the other person's feeling. And then it's like, did I feel angry or did I feel sad or anything before I started interacting with this person? Okay, no, or before I heard this bit of information or this whatever. And then I'm able to understand the difference between mine and someone else's. So being able to not have that constant being around people has actually been kind of nice, because that means I'm not constantly picking up other people's emotions or around other people's emotions all the time. So that's been kind of nice.
Yeah.
To have that break of it, but still, like I said, you still interact with people, so you still have to develop your boundaries, but it just gives you time to not have to be on all the time with karate chopping other people's emotions. Like, no, that's not mine. So that's kind of
the space already creates a boundary that you don't have to make yourself.
Exactly, right. And then so on the physical, for me, like I love going on long walks, and this has provided opportunity for me to do that. And then relating back to everything else, like when I go on a walk, it's just, again, I'm alone with my own emotions mentally. It's like a stress reliever, so it helps my mental state. And then even on that spiritual level, it's kind of like that continuous, I guess, prayer of connecting with God. So it fits all the levels when just in that solitude of just taking a long walk. So that's how that's been fitting together for me during this time of solitude. So yeah.
Well, you've gained a lot. You've definitely gained in areas I'm still working on. But that's what it's about, I feel. That everyone needs to figure out what they're going to gain for themselves in this season. It's an opportunity. I don't feel that it's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like it's an opportunity that I don't think we'll ever have again in our lives. And I want to make the most of it. I don't want to leave this season and feel that I didn't gain anything from it.
Right.
So, we're going through it for a particular reason. So whatever the reason it is, I want it to be a good one. That's how I look at it. Some people look at it as doom and gloom. I don't, I feel like that's a part of the mindset. How you look at it, how you, mentally feel about certain things, how you deal with it. So I've chosen to not look at it in that space, and to look at it a time of true reflection and alignment with what it is that God has in store for us at this time. Right.
Yeah. So, and that's like, I guess, again, everything circles back to the spiritual. So your faith and hope is what is giving you that perspective, which is really cool.
Definitely.
Right.
Yes.
And and it's helping you stay grounded, where if you didn't have that, you know how easy it is to let your mind roam and run. Well, is everything like you said, the doom and gloom is right there waiting to jump on the opportunity if you allow it to. But shoring yourself up in that area, it just makes sure that that reflects in your mental state of having almost a positive outlook on something that's, and that's a positive outlook, being respectful of those who've been impacted by it and have lost loved ones by it.
Oh yeah.
And just kind of having that balance in mind, but also just being able to, I like the way you broke down that, how you're able to keep that positive mental state in the midst of all that.
Right. And even, truth, there's people going through real struggles at this time. Yep. To not to belittle that, but life is always about peaks and valleys. Moments in our life that are you feel like you're on top of the world, and other moments in our life where you are in the lowest of valleys, and how being aligned in those principles can carry you through each one of those seasons seamlessly. Whether you're in the valley season, you need those 4 principles. Whether you're at the peak season, those same 4 areas are just as critical at both times. So exactly. I think to sum it up, the truth of it all is that having the 4 principles of spirituality, mentality, your emotional state, and your physical state are so interconnected, and by taking care of those things, you'll do a good job of taking care of yourself. The lie of it is that you don't need to take care of how you feel and how you think and how you are, what your spiritual and physical states are, that they're not really important, which I believe they're very important, and that a lot of times we create circumstances in our lives that are way more difficult because we don't take care of those areas. Yeah. Right. And having to deal with the consequences of that can be very detrimental to a person if they don't necessarily take the time to really be healthy in those spaces. What would you say the truth, the lie, and the consequence of these principles are in your life, Ebony?
Yeah, so for me, the truth is, so I look at all these 4 principles as really, like we talked about, the self-discovery of getting to know yourself, because I believe that outside of a relationship with God, you need to have a relationship with yourself. And in these 4 principles is really like the key of understanding who you are because of the relationship you have with yourself. So I said that's the truth, that you got to know who you are and have a good relationship with you and the relationship with God first. And those 4 principles help you in that journey. And I'd say the lie of it is that you have to go outside of yourself to find out who you are. I think all the answers that you need is within yourself. And then the consequences is that sometimes on that journey of self-discovery and you figuring out who you are, you may have to walk away from things and people that compromise who you are. And so that for me is the truth, lies, and consequences.
All right. That was a really good. I'm really glad you went in about, sometimes it's just a matter of doing what's best for you at that time as well, because everything that you start with doesn't necessarily be what you have to finish with, and everyone has to figure that out along the way.
Exactly. Yep.
So we hope you enjoyed this episode of Truth, Lies, and Consequences podcast. Thank you for listening, and please tune in to future episodes.